Another big theme or topic that maybe I'm starting to see and want to process with you is it's a little bit different than growth barriers, because growth barriers means, hey, we have grown and we're starting to see some blockades, some hurdles on the horizon. But what about not everybody can sustain that rate of growth forever? So it's inevitable that you hit a stall at some point in time. How do you anticipate those stalls? How do you keep your cool in a stall? How do you leverage maybe even the lessons that God's teaching you in those seasons? What have you found? Not to assume that you've survived a ton of stalls, but I'm sure you've been in a few. I know I've journeyed with you through a few, and it's like, what do you see from your perspective?
Yeah, if you're a leader and you haven't had any stalls, I don't know what. Like, I want to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And we've been through some together, and thank God we were together. I think we've learned a lot, and it's part of all of these things. Stalls are struggles. Struggles are, little insights to success. But I think any, great journey that you're taking, and hopefully, especially if if you've planted a church, if you're growing a church, what greater journey could you take? And it's a wild and varied journey for everybody. You can be in a quiet little place, and a church is always going to be, a big journey. And I think any great journey requires look ahead, or, trying to see what's coming. And so this whole idea of anticipating stalls, stalls can't always be anticipated. You take a thing like COVID came on so quickly.
Yeah.
Really just, from when people started talking about it to when things started slamming shut was days and weeks. It wasn't even months.
Right.
So there are exceptions, but I think, what can we control about seeing stalls? I think part of it is, when I think about traveling on a journey, there's always a person who's been assigned, whether it's the leader or somebody the leader's assigned to be kind of a watchman, and they typically have a device, and they are typically faced forward. So it could be binoculars, it could be a telescope, it could be radar if you're on a ship, and they're kind of trying to take in anything they can see out front, both with their eyes or with data or with predictions.
Yeah.
And they're trying to assimilate what those things are. And either the things that I see them doing are, and that we've done is, how do I go around that? It's like, you can't go around COVID. So like, there are certain things you can't go around, but how do I navigate around that? And the quicker I know about it, the more I can plan, the quicker I can start turning, especially if you have a big church. Big churches don't turn on a dime.
Yeah.
If you're driving a PT boat, it turns a lot sharper. A speedboat turns a lot sharper than a cruise ship does, or a battleship. So, like, what can I get? And that device, and the analogy can be, what is it that I'm trying to see into the future? What indicators do we know? Like, I'm watching very carefully right now the financial climate and the political climate, and there's, what's going on with Ukraine and Israel, and what effect does that have on the country, which has an effect on my state, which has an effect on my city, which has an effect on my people. And when is that potential effect going to happen? What's happening with mortgage rates? And I don't want to sound too technical, but it's like, all of that stuff matters. It affects people's mindsets, what they need to hear from the platform. It affects their giving. It affects their perspective. It affects all those things. So I think, stalls come from not seeing it coming. They certainly can come from other things, but understanding and having, I think the other thing we talk about a lot is, that's important for a lot of different reasons, is early indicators need metrics, and metrics will give you trends to start seeing when something starts to go off, which lifts your eyes up to look ahead, to go like, is something out there affecting this, or is this something that I'm doing that's causing this? But I think there's a lot of other reasons, but that's a little bit of,
Yeah.
of what I think about it. And I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
No, I mean, I think that that's powerful. I know that's one of the resources we've created is that the truth is in the trend. So like, don't just zero into my day-to-day or week-to-week response and reaction. Zoom out. And because even as you were talking, talking about the ship turning around and anticipating that stall, trying to avoid it, there's some that I think are just built into our regular calendar season that you're going to hit a natural stall.
Yeah.
June, July might be low for most people. And there's actually some benefit in that if we can anticipate that, and we can leverage it differently than we would if we were hoping or expecting something different and then
Right.
being disappointed because we didn't see it. But we can look that through the trends. We can compare year to year or month to month. I think those are good comparisons. You had said something that I'm trying to put back together, because you were talking about how whether it's microscope, telescope, periscope, but we've got all this data that's coming in, and then you've got this like there's the numbers, but then there's also the prayer and the leading of the Holy Spirit, and then there's where is our culture headed? There's almost kind of this mix of things that you kind of have to lay on top and then submit to God and to, I think, trusting other leaders in the organization to say, what are you sensing? What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What are you learning? And that's why I also think rubbing shoulders with other leaders too, is to say, is this just me in my city? Is this just me and you're in my city and you're not experiencing it? Or are we kind of collectively going through something together? Because that can then also give me not just perspective, but also I'm able to link arms with other people and say, let's tackle this together. Let's not just, I'm not alone or on an island. So
Yep.
those are things as you're talking that I'm like, man, yeah, those are helpful views to have.
Yep.
When trying to stay ahead. Again, I don't think we can avoid it all.
Yeah.
How would you, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, another thought that came to mind is oftentimes I think it's counterintuitive, what we have our ear to kind of understand, like if our organization is starting to stall out. Because, sometimes this isn't, I talked a lot about external forces, but sometimes it can just be internal things. We start to get complacent, or we, start to get off track, and that can cause an internal stall, right? Because you're just not unintentionally not watching what you need to. The process is the same. It's to have your ear to the ground to understand what's happening inside your church, inside your organization. And I think about when I was a kid, we were fascinated, me and the other kids would go down I grew up by railroad tracks with freight trains, and we would go down and we'd always wait for the train, and it'd be like, as little boys are, very impatient. And it's like, I can't see it coming. I can't see it coming. And the first indication we'd have is if it's coming, is somebody would literally put their head down, which is fascinating to think about, putting your head on a railroad.
Don't do this at home.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of I was just thinking of your boys, Philip, like, please, boys, don't do what I did. But we would put your head down, and you could feel a low rumbling in the tracks way before you could ever see the train.
Yeah.
And like, I think sometimes we look up, we look around, and we also, and this is nothing about big churches, but like we look to the big churches to tell us, because they're, the older, wiser. And I think we see, this, we see every day that sometimes the effect of something that's happening is at the lowest. You have to get down to the lowest part of or the farthest part of your organization from you. So like the people on the front lines, the volunteer leaders, the volunteers, the frontline staff, the congregation facing frontline staff are usually the first to see whether it's an internal issue or an external issue that could cause a stall. That's where you're going to see it. It's not going to come to the lead pastor, to the CEO, to the XP necessarily. They may be the wisest people on the team, but so if I am the leader, I'm going to get down in the bowels of the ship. And that's And it's not when I hear something, it's always, and it's pulling up alongside people
Yeah.
just to tell them I love them, but also just go like, what's going on? What are you seeing out there? And, or what are you seeing in here? And it's like, I started to notice people, I've seen more and more couples that I always see on Sunday. There's 2 or 3 of them that I haven't been seeing lately.
Right.
And it's like, well, and there's a lot of those things, but I do think it's about really going low versus, getting up and trying to see around.
Yeah.
It's like, what is happening down in there in the nuance
Yeah.
of our organization? It's because it's not going to be obvious until it hits you right in the forehead.
Yeah. I like that. It's actually creating some of those practices and habits of consistently looking at the trends, but then also diving deep a couple times throughout the year. And, some of the great resources to do that is just a team inventory or pull together a focus group or something like that. Just to ask some organizational health questions, some participation questions, some engagement, and get a sense or a feel of those that you trust that are in the church, what they're sensing and seeing. The other thing might also be super helpful is they are going to look at church differently than we who live, eat, breathe church every day. And so just that perspective, I think sometimes can be refreshing to know like, okay, they're not thinking about it as often as we are. And so what can we do to keep it more in front of them? And that's not just church, but just our relationship with God, our relationship with others, and just using the gifts and the skills that got placed in you to find that fulfillment and joy. Yeah, that's great.
That's so good. It's such a great point. And yeah, it never ceases to amaze me when I go into try to engage with a organization, whether it's a church, whether it's a retail, whether it's a service, how much you realize in the nuance indicates that they haven't been down in the process for, at any important level for a long time, because it's always an accumulation of the small stuff that um, you realize hasn't been seen from, as you pointed out, from an outside innocent perspective, meaning I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I don't know how to interact with you. I don't know what we're trying to do. And if I come in from that perspective, which should be our perspective for everything we do, how confusing and unclear is it to get to the next step? And when you ask somebody because you finally need help and they go, oh yeah, and yeah, oh yeah, and they show you something and it's like, well, when I was in the process a minute ago, whether it being on the website or being in the building, and there was nothing that made that obvious, do they just help me get along my way, or do they go like, wow, people aren't getting that, what are they not getting? You and I are in airport You and I, unfortunately, are in airports constantly. And it's like, I'm convinced the people that make airline signs, directional signs in an airport,
Never,
have,
never
have been
fly.
a part of that airport forever.
Yeah.
And they try to recreate telling people how to get somewhere that they know how to get to, but it doesn't contain the primary questions that you would need answered for you if you
Yeah.
didn't know how to get there. And it's like, that's a perfect analogy for how we typically, you know, present ourselves, if you will. We present it from the knowing,
Yeah.
and it just has so many gaps because people get hung up in the nuance.
Yeah. That's so great.